Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Digital Marketing Can podcast, where we bring you actionable insights and latest strategies from the brightest minds in the industry. Today's episode is especially relevant for founders, marketers, and financial teams trying to scale profitability in high dynamic and digital first now. We are joined by Matt, CFO of EightX, a strategic finance partner to e-commerce and digital brands. With years of experience helping companies manage their growth sustainability, Matt brings razor sharp insights into the financial reliabilities behind successful digital. Hi Matt!
Hey, thank you so much, Prince. It's so nice to be here.
So, before starting our conversation, can you just give us a bit background about when you do the finance industry, or why do you think that digital marketing is something which is of your interest?
Well, yeah, so I used to be a CFO for a corporate group. I worked in private equity and I was a senior partner and group CFO. And I basically didn't want to do corporate anymore. And so during COVID, I started working from home and building my business outside of my desk. And that was, I've been doing this now for 5 years. We've worked with probably 100 brands or so over the last 5 years. And we ended up working with eCommerce sort of by accident, but it's a wonderful community, great people in it, and it's been really great. And so why why do I have to focus on marketing? Well, most e-commerce and most e-commerce companies, the three biggest expense items are cost of goods sold, marketing, and staff. And so I had to become an expert, at least on the financial side of marketing, to help my clients.
Sure. Okay, so now coming to the topic that we have. So digital marketers, they often choose ROAS or CAC, while the finance team, they generally talk about cash flow and runways. Why do you think that it's such a disconnect? And how can companies or the owners can bridge that gap?
Right. So, why is there a disconnect, right? It's because marketers aren't finance people and finance people aren't marketers, and there's nobody to bridge the gap. There are a few really interesting people doing this, like Taylor Holiday from Common Thread Collective is doing a lot of work on helping marketers understand finance people and vice versa. And I think his approach is, helping the marketers be better at finance and going that way. And I'm going from the other direction, like how do we understand marketing as finance people? It's just different skill sets, right? And different language and different verbiage and acronyms, all these things. That's why it's so different. And how does an e-commerce owner bridge the gap? Well, you have to pick probably some important metrics. I like to look at blended ROAS. I know a lot of people don't like it, but it's one of the easiest ones to translate from marketing to finance and back. CAC is another good one because, again, sometimes people don't like it, but I believe it's really easy to translate CAC in for a finance person and then to understand how that affects your cash flow. So here's an example. When you look at blended ROAS, it's advertising divided by, it's net revenue divided by total advertising. Those are two lines on an income statement. So very simple for a finance person to understand how it works on an income statement, right? It's also simple for a marketing person to understand. Now, marketers like it less because it's a very aggregated number, but it's very easy for finance people to understand, okay? So if a marketing person can go from their CPMs and CTRs and CVRs and understand revenue from first customers, NCAC and NROAS and AMER, and if they can get into all these acronyms and map it out on a sheet and show the finance person at the end of all these other metrics, here's your total ad spend. And here's the total revenue we expect to get from returning from new customers. Then you have ROAS. And so that's why ROAS is very simple and very easy to use. Well, it's not easy, but it's one of the best ones that can align marketing and finance. CAC is not as straightforward. Customer acquisition cost is not as straightforward, but it's also a good one because you can tell a finance person the average order, let's say we look at CPA first.
Yeah.
Our average order is $80. Our CPA is $50. Here's our gross margin, here's our shipping cost, and this is what our first purchase profit is from this customer, if it's profitable, right? So then a finance person can understand that. And you can say, hey, finance person, if I buy, let's say for example, you $80 AOV, and your margin after cost of goods and shipping is, let's say you get to keep 60%. So that's $48 of margin. And your CPA is $40. So you can tell a finance person, if I pay the money to get an order, I make $8. Should I get another one at $8? Well, the answer is yes. Should I spend more money to get another one at $8? The answer is yes. Should I get one for, if I spend $40.50, I make $7.50? Should I do that? Well, the answer is yes. And so you're talking in some financial language that will help you get more money from your CEO, from your CFO. Let's say, for example, you're not first purchase profitable. Let's say you make $48 after expenses from a customer order, and you want to spend $50. Okay, well, you make negative profit on that first purchase. So the next question is, when do they buy again? If they buy again in 30 days, then now you make your $2 back, plus you make another, let's say, $46 profit on this customer. Okay. And so if the marketing people can tell the finance people, these probably three big metrics are the ones for finance, are ROAS, CPA or CAC, and then payback period, finance people can get on board. We can forecast that. You can say, look, I'm going to lose money on every customer, but they're going to pay me back in 30 days. Well, I can map that into a financial forecast, right? And if you tell me the numbers and they're good, I can tell you how long it will take to make money and how much cash flow we need and all this stuff. So though, in doing that, like those three things are the big ones that will align finance and marketing. Yeah, for sure.
So you have mentioned about making that mix out. So how should the digital brands think about allocating that budget to paid media, content, and experimentation, especially during the uncertain time?
Got it. So first off, I'll say I'm not an expert at allocating the intricate details of marketing budgets, but I'm an expert at overall budget. So here's what I think about overall budget. The secret of 8 and 9 figure companies, and I work with a number of them, is the budgeting. And again, I go back to blended ROAS because it's so easy. So we'll make a budget for the year. Let's say you're going to make $40 million or even $100 million, right? I need the marketing team to tell me how much money they want. Okay, great. So they can say on 100 million, we need 20 million or 30 million in revenue. So then my ROAS is 3.3. Blended ROAS is 3.3. Okay. I tell them, so your blended ROAS is 3.3. Great. So that's the money. Now I need to understand. The contribution margin. But again, I know that on 100 million, if my margin after ad spend is, let's say, 55%, I make 55 million in contribution margin. Great. Now you're telling me I want 30 million of that to spend on ads. So now I make $25 million after cost of goods, shipping, payment processing, influencer commissions, all these things, right? And I make $25 million. Great. And now I need to make a profit. So I need to say I need to make $10 million in profit. Now I know that I have $15 million left in fixed cost. Okay. So it's relatively simple to do a budget at a high level. The question is, how do you take that 30 million and break it into channels and other things? So what I have to say on that is that some of the fastest growing companies that I've worked with and that I've got to have conversations with, they are spending around 5% on top of funnel. And they treat that like a fixed cost. So they spend it every month, no matter what. They're going to spend on 100 million. They spend 5 million that year on top of funnel, on awareness, on brand. Viore did that, for example. They spent 30% on performance, 5% extra additional on brand. So then I would say 5 million is brand, 25 million is on direct response. Okay. So now you have some breakdowns in there. From there, I believe as a CFO, it's up to the marketing team to make the decisions on how much is spent on influencers or Meta or Google or Taboola or AppLovin or TikTok. For me, I'm asking them to continue to improve acquisition and scale, or at least continue to scale while holding margins, like making more money. And so in some cases, I say, look, this is the overall budget. You can have 30 million this year. You tell me what you're going to do with it, and make a scorecard so we can keep on top of how you're doing. And that's how we do it.
Definitely. So generally, it's a kind of A/B testing that we generally do upon. That let's say if I have given $1,000 out there, now you have to look upon that. Okay, how you have to utilize that $1,000 in the best way. There can be a possibility that if I'm seeing that Google search is giving me a better result out there, so I might be putting a bit more present out there. If I see that the Facebook and Instagram that are giving me good leads, but they might not be of good quality that they can be converted, so I'll be allocating a bit of medium budget out there. So it is just that finance team gives the budget, and then the marketing team needs to tackle that, and then they need to just put their priority that, okay, what are my priority one, what is my priority two, and then accordingly they can.
Exactly. And I will not get into that detail unless there's a problem. So let's say we've agreed 30 million. Let's say we've agreed on a blended ROAS, and we've agreed on contribution margin in terms of dollars, and we've agreed that conversion rate should be this and click-through rate should be that, and we've agreed on a number of things at a high level. I will let them do whatever they want if they're hitting their targets. When they're not hitting their targets is when I will ask more questions. What's going on with your click-through? Why is your click-through rate worse than you said? Why is your conversion rate worse than you said? Is it your funnels? Is it your... Then I'll get into the detail. I don't know enough to build a plan myself, but when there's a problem, I can help people figure it out because we'll look at the data, right? And so again, if they're self-correcting, if the marketing, if the CMO and the VP or whatever are self-correcting, or if they're on track, I stay out of their way. I will try to get them more money, and I'm generally successful getting a VP or CMO more money from the CEO, CFO, typically.
So definitely, like you have said that there should be some KPIs that should be tracked out. But then with iOS privacy updates, and there are a lot of platform shifts that keeps on happening, measuring true ROI is becoming harder day by day.
Yes.
How do you recommend companies approach financial planning when attribution data is a bit murky?
Yeah, this is this since 2021, it's been hard to figure out, right? And what I always want to do is bring a marketing team back to the income statement, the P&L, the profit and loss, the profit, because that doesn't lie, right? And cash flow doesn't lie. And so when attribution is difficult, you go back to the P&L. And at a high level, again, back to blended ROAS, if we're hitting the revenue that you said we would, and our blended ROAS is what you said it would be, I'll get out of your way. I'll leave you alone, right? If it's not, and you haven't come to me with a plan for fixing it, then I'm going to get in your way and I'm going to give you some trouble and I'm going to take money away or help you reallocate it or whatever, right? But again, there's all these attribution models now, Trip Oil and Hyros and Northbeam, and some of them are very, very good. But you can't ignore now the income statement anymore. You can't rely only on those like in the way that you used to. But again, I just come back to the P&L. We can, because of the data is available, we can make weekly P&Ls for marketing teams or even daily. And as long as that's on track, I'll stay out of your way. If it goes off track or profitability is worse or something, then we need to dive into all those different systems. But if they're doing what they told me they would do, I'll stay out of their way.
One thing that we have generally seen into the digital marketing industry is that many a times it happens that we often spend more compared to the returns that we generally get. People spend lakhs or crores of rupees out there, and the return that they get is generally not the ROI that they expect. So how can brands manage this cash flow without throttling the growth?
Well, the answer is you have to throttle your growth, right? If you spend more to acquire a customer than they give you on the first purchase, you cannot buy as many customers as you want. You have to throttle your growth. That's the answer. So I had somebody, a pet supplement brand, and they figured out that they could acquire customers at a small loss with a payback in 2 months. And they said, we're going to get as many customers as we can. And I was like, actually, you can't do that. You'll run out of money, right? So what you do when you're not first purchase profitable is you need a model to show you how much returning revenue do you have and the margin on that. How many new customers do you want to buy and what's the revenue and the margin on that? And then of course you have to look at your fixed costs and everything else. And then you have to look at your cash and you got to go, well, how many new customers can I afford to acquire, right? And if it's a lot, then you have to just look at how much cash flow you have, right? Because no matter if you raise venture capital or not, cash flow is still always limited by it's finite.
Yeah.
So you just have to make a model. And if you have an analyst or a CFO, they can do this for you. Otherwise, you can make it relatively simple. So you go returning customer revenue to make a forecast for this. New customers acquired times the cost to acquire them and the revenue. And you can look at your margins, right? You can make the plan. Make it as simple as possible. But the answer is if you're not first profitable, your growth must be throttled for you to survive. Because if you buy too many customers, you lose too much money, spend too much cash, and it might take too long to come back. So you have to be much more careful in that case.
Definitely, it should be a much careful level. Now, since you have worked with a lot of clients out there into the industry, what do you think is the biggest mistakes that you have seen brands making while trying to scale performance campaigns financially?
The biggest mistake? The biggest mistake is not turning off poor performing campaigns. I think that's one of them is, or at least having poor performing campaigns running. Another one is, not knowing that first purchase profitability and the payback period is another one. What else? Actually, another one which might surprise you is that, and this is a massive mistake, is that sometimes people think they want to make 25% contribution margin on everything all the time. So what I mean by that is you take your revenue, less your product costs, less shipping, less payment processing, less commissions, less ad spend, and that's your contribution margin. And 25% is a good number. But what people do is they say we must make 25% always. Why that's a mistake? Because let's say you're doing $20 million a year. And you have 25% contribution margin, which means you're making $5 million in contribution, and your fixed costs are $4 million, so you're making $1 million a year. Great, okay. You might throttle your growth by keeping it at 25%, so you'll only be at 20 million. The next $1 million is going to cost you more to get, but some people aren't willing to spend the money to get it. But the math is this: if you're at 20, you're making, again, like $5 million contribution and $4 million fixed costs and $1 million profit. Well, let's say the next $1 million costs you more to acquire. So your contribution margin drops to, let's say, 23. But on 21 million, let me just get my calculator here. So on 21 million, actually, that's actually a good example of that. That does not work because your margin has dropped, right? So on that additional $1 million in revenue, if your margin was 23% instead of 25, you'd make an additional $230,000. Wouldn't you take it? Well, you would, right? But a lot of people don't because they can't bear to see that 25% number decrease to 24.5 or 24.7 or even 24. But that's what they miss. I work with a couple very large companies. That is the biggest mistake that they make. And when I convince them to think about this differently, we make multiple six figures more bottom line dollars. Why? Well, here's the answer, right? At 20 million, your fixed costs are 4 million. At 21 million, your fixed costs are still 4 million. So any additional dollar of profit puts more money in the owner's pocket. But you see a small decrease in the percentage of the margin. And that is by number one, the biggest mistake people make. And we have a client in Canada. We made them 20% more revenue, 40% more profit when we convinced them to do this. So 40% more profit. And this is 8 weeks after we started working with them. They started making 40% more net profit, bottom line net profit, because we convinced them to not worry about the percentage so much, right? So that is the biggest mistake in terms of dollars that I see.
This is a very informative insight that you have given. Now, since we have been discussing a lot about the different type of matrices that generally, kind of both the marketing and the finance team generate, what do you think are the financial insights or the metrics that marketing leaders should observe?
Yeah. Okay. So again, when you're talking about bridging finance and marketing at the highest level, blended ROAS, CAC payback, those are the three big ones. LTV is another important one, right? Because if your CAC payback is 2 months, but they never buy again, you have to be first purchase profitable. If your CAC payback is 2 months and they buy for another 6 more months, well, then it's worth doing. So yeah, so LTV, and I would say GP LTV, gross profit lifetime value, meaning revenue minus your cost of goods minus your shipping and all this other stuff, right? When is that payback? Because most people think about LTV in terms of revenue, but what's your GP LTV, right? Another one, no, I mean, from the finance perspective, those are the big ones, I think. Average discounting, we should be watching. Return rates, we should be watching. For a lot of people that I work with, we make what we call a funnel map, meaning we look at how much you're spending on ads, how many impressions, so what's your CPM? Then we look at how many web sessions, so we call that a true CTR. Then we look at how many purchases, we call that a true CVR. And then we can look at how many first-time customers you get, what's your CAC. So when you do that, you actually break your marketing down into the full funnel, CPM, CTR, CVR, and you make assumptions for the whole year on this full funnel, okay? And then when something goes wrong, you can look and you can say, oh, my CAC is too high, but why? Well, this month the CPM went high, okay, great. Or the CTR went the wrong way, or the CVR went the wrong way. So you can break your CAC or your ROAS, and you can break it into these detailed metrics and figure out where in the funnel things are broken or could be optimized. Conversely, if your revenue beats your budget, well, which part of it is it the CTR? Like, did we make really great ads this month? Well, let's look at what we created and let's replicate that again. Or let's say your CVR went really well. Great. Well, let's send more traffic through. Right. Do you know what I mean? Or your CPMs were low. I mean, I don't know if you can do anything about that, but maybe you just buy more ads because CPMs are lower than you thought they'd be, or maybe there's something going on, right? So I would look at the full funnel on a scorecard very regularly.
So, Matt, this has been an incredible deep dive into the financial sides of the digital marketing. Any parting advice for digital entrepreneurs or growth teams navigating today's financial turbulence?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that to know your numbers really well and understand your assumptions very well and put your assumptions very clearly into a Google Sheet or Excel or whatever you have and make your assumptions for the whole year on like a budget, right? Then maybe make a section below that where you put in your actuals. And then you can see what's different about your assumptions between what's actually happening. And that's where you get true insight, is comparing what you thought would happen to what did happen. And that's what a lot of people don't do.
Thank you once again for joining us, Matt.
Thanks.
For our listeners, if you are running any digital marketing campaign, understanding your financial runway and profitability is just as important as scaling reach. Stay sharp, stay smart, and keep growing. Until next time, this is Prince Kumar signing off from the Digital Marketing Camp.